The Samkhya-Karika of Ishvara Krishna, being a treatise on psychophysics for self-realization. Edited and translated by Radhanath Pukan. October 1960. So I'm going to read the preface and introduction, and I'm not going to read all the notes for the verses, but I'm going to read just like straight through so you can get the idea of what the text is actually saying. Several years ago, I translated the Samkhya Karikas and then the Brahma Sutras into Assamese. Indian philosophy I never did profess to know. Nevertheless, I translated those books because they had not been translated into Assamese so long. Later on, with a view to add to my humble contribution to my mother language, I translated the Gita and wrote some other booklets on allied subjects. In all those books, I tried to explain my points by citing illustrations from modern physical science. It is no doubt unorthodox to try to understand spiritual truths with a materialistic outlook, but my attempt was perhaps not entirely unsuccessful, for the Bhavan's Journal, December 15, 1957, reviewing one of my booklets, translated into Hindi by my daughter-in-law, wrote as follows. The Hindi version of the above book by Sri Radhanath Pukan, Vedanta Vachaspati, is a very valuable piece of literature. The book was originally written in Assamese. The author has successfully tried to explain to the layman the highly philosophical and moral ideas of the Upanishads. Fine commentaries at the end of each story, which are the result of deep study of Western thinkers like Eddington and others, add much to the value of the book. Some little time ago, a friend of mine, Dr. Ajit Ranjan Bhattacharjee of the Calcutta University, insisted that these books should be translated into English so that the new method of treatment may receive wider publicity. Another friend of mine, Sri Sailendra Nath Sengupta, judge of the Civic Civil Court, Calcutta, undertook to translate these books, and he actually translated parts 1, 2, and 3 of the introduction to the Samkhya Darshana. He did so out of the kindness to me, and I shall ever remain grateful to him. At this stage, it was suggested to me that the Assamese books, having been meant for laymen, with or without any scientific or philosophical background, were somewhat verbose and even contained some repetitions. The present English translation is meant for another purpose and for another class of readers. Here, as it were, I have framed an issue and am submitting it to a court of learned pandits for a decision. The issue is, 1. Whether the Samkhya philosophy is atheistic and without a clear meaning, or 2. Whether it is a precisely scientific treatise on psychophysics for God realization. Accordingly, I have made this book as brief as I could. It has become practically a new rendering of the Samkhya Karikas, and not a mere translation from Assamese. I am particularly grateful to Dr. Mahopadhyaya Gopinath Kaviraj of Varanasi, who received me very kindly and took the trouble of going through the typescript copy of the book. He has now returned it to me with some kind words which I am publishing below as a foreword from such a high authority. Lastly, I have great pleasure in acknowledging the valuable assistance rendered to me by my cousin R.R. Kand in all matters connected with the publication of this book. I am also indebted to Sri Amalendu Sen, Advocate, Calcutta, who has helped in revising the script and reading the proofs. June 15, 1960, in Jorhat, Assam. I have glanced through the pages of the manuscript of Sri Radhanath Pukan's work on Samkhya Darshan. It is an English translation of Ishvara Krishna's Samkhya Karikas with introduction and notes in English. In the introduction, he has dealt with the fundamentals of Samkhya philosophy and psychology, and in this study his knowledge of the implications of modern physical science has been made to throw helpful light. Though there have been several English renderings of these Karikas, the present translation has a value of its own and will, I hope, be properly appreciated by those for whom it is intended. Gopinath Kaviraj, August 4th, 1960. So, Introduction, Part 1, Revolution in Western Science. 1. There is no important difference between the Samkhya and the Vedanta philosophy. What difference there is in the angle of vision. In Vedanta, the world is seen from the outside with a subtle philosophical mind. Hence, in order to understand the reasoning of the Vedanta, it requires a minimum intellectual capacity. In Samkhya, on the other hand, the world is seen broadly from the worldly point of view. It takes one gradually to matters more and more subtle, and ultimately leads him to a stage from which he may easily realize all the fundamentals. The method of analysis is the same in the Samkhya as in the modern science. In science, all gross matter is taken up first for analysis, which is carried ultimately to such a subtle stage that one may doubt whether the universe is at all real. The relativity and the quantum theories lend support to the conclusion of the Samkhya philosophy, and to one who is conversant with these theories, a proper understanding of the Samkhya philosophy would be quite easy. For this reason, I shall discuss very briefly one or two important matters dealt with by Western science, which may help us in understanding the underlying principles of the Samkhya theory of creation. This discussion may be skipped over by those readers who may be familiar with the relativity theory and the quantum mechanics. 2. About 1900 AD, scientists were of the view that the universe was like a big machine. From dust particles right up to the planets and the stars, everything material was held to be regulated by the natural laws, most of which had already been discovered by science. It was thought that a man could be omniscient and all-powerful if he could somehow fully grasp all these laws. The world was taken by surprise when the materialistic science discovered complicated machines like the airplane, the radio, and the cinema. The result was an infinite faith in science, so much so that one was prepared to hold that even one's own soul had no existence because its existence could not be demonstrated by scientific experiment. Men became indifferent to God because it was felt that the world would go on as before according to the natural laws discovered by scientists, whether God really existed or not. It is not that the scientists at this time were all unbelievers. As a matter of fact, most of them were by nature religious-minded and God-fearing. But they found it difficult to reconcile their religious belief with their convictions as scientists. Thus, Eddington states, "In the last century and also in this, there must have been many scientific men who kept their science and religion in watertight compartments. One set of beliefs held good in the laboratory and another set of beliefs in church, and no serious effort was made to harmonize them. Religion first became possible for a reasonable scientific man about the year 1927. Eddington in The Nature of the Physical World, page 3. I think it is for this reason that in 1893, Madame Blavatsky forecasted that soon the materialistic science would receive a death blow. This is what she actually stated. It is at the close of great cycles that such events generally take place. We are at the very close of the cycle of 5,000 years of the present Aryan Kali Yuga, and between this time and 1897, there will be a large rent in the veil of nature, and materialistic science will receive a death blow." The Secret Doctrine, Volume 1, page 671. Her prognosis was fulfilled almost literally, for a revolution in the world of science commenced from 1904. This revolution is still proceeding. But now, the Western science is no longer materialistic and is actually idealistic. On this point, it would be interesting to see what Sir James Jeans says. The law and order which we find in the universe are most easily described, and also, I think, most easily explained in the language of idealism. Thus, subject to the reservation already mentioned, we may say that present-day science is favorable to idealism. In brief, idealism has always maintained that, as the beginning of the road by which we explore nature is mental, the chances are that the end will also be mental. To this, the present-day science adds that, at the farthest point she has so far reached, much and possibly all, that was not mental, has disappeared and nothing new has come in that is not mental. Yet, who shall say what we may find awaiting us at the next corner? New Background of Science, page 307. The present view of science is, to quote Eddington, that the purely objective sources of the objective element in our observational knowledge have already been named. They are life, consciousness, and spirit. We reach, then, the position of idealist as opposed to materialist philosophy. The purely objective world is the spiritual world, and the material world is subjective in the sense of selective subjectivism. The Philosophy of Physical Science, page 69. It would be interesting to discuss what led to this wonderful revolution in Western science. 3. In 1887, an epoch-making experiment was conducted by two scientists, Dr. Michelson, an American, and Professor Morley, a German. The experiment was repeated by other scientists, but it is necessary to refer only to the experiment repeated by Morley and Miller in 1904. The original object of the experiment was to ascertain the existence of ether. The existence of ether could not be demonstrated by the experiment, but it proved something which was at that time not even dreamt of by most scientists. It proved that if a scale or anything having length moves at a tremendous speed approaching that of light, then the length of the scale will remain constant if it is kept always at right angles to the direction of the speed, but that it would contract if it was kept parallel to the line of the motion. The contraction would depend on the velocity, and the length would be reduced to nothing if the velocity equals that of light. The contradiction is known as the Fitzgerald contraction, which can be calculated easily if the velocity is known. It would certainly be astounding if the length of a yardstick varied with the direction and rate of its velocity. It seems most unnatural, but it is a scientific truth. Eddington says as follows: "There is really nothing mysterious about the Fitzgerald contraction. It would be an unnatural property of a rod pictured in the old way as a continuous substance, occupying space in virtue of its substantiality, but it is an entirely natural property of a swarm of particles held in delicate balance of electromagnetic forces, and occupying space by buffeting away anything that tries to enter. The Fitzgerald contraction is not an imperfection, but a fixed and characteristic property of matter, like inertia." It will be shown later on in my notes on Karika 33 that this Fitzgerald contraction appears in all our calculations because we calculate time and space separately instead of regarding them as an inseparable unit designated by modern science as space-time. It is impossible to ascertain if anything in the universe is stationary. It seems every constituent of the universe is moving at tremendous speeds. The stars, it has been found, are all moving away from us at enormous speeds, hundreds of miles per second. But a scientist living on the pole star, for instance, thinks that the Earth is moving at 1,000 miles per second while he himself is stationary. In the same way, we here think that our Earth is stationary while the pole star is moving at a rate of 1,000 miles a second. It is impossible to say to which of us the observed relative velocity of 1,000 miles a second really belongs. Let us, however, take it that we are stationary, and then think how the Fitzgerald contraction has affected all the calculations made by us or by the scientist on the pole star. One of us must be wrong. The constancy of the measuring scale was the only thing on which the whole structure of classical physics was based. It does not matter whether we measure with a yardstick or a theodolite, or merely judge distances by the eye. All methods of measurement will agree and must agree. Suppose we have made a survey of the world or a portion of it and located the surrounding objects in their respective positions in space. We, of course, overlook the Fitzgerald contraction because we are stationary as we think. Now let us see what the scientist on the pole star will think of the picture drawn by us, if he can see it and compare it with the picture he himself has drawn of the same frame of space. His scale contracts in one direction, as stated above, and consequently all his measurements of lengths in that direction will be too great. A square in our configuration of space will be a rectangle to him. He will, no doubt, exclaim, "How unfortunate are those people on the earth! They cannot have a right view of the frame of space in which they live. And this is because they are moving at a rate of 1,000 miles per second. They must have deduced a system of laws of nature which must have been vitiated by their wrong measurements of lengths in one direction. How unfortunate!" It was long known to scientists that the color of anything moving at a great speed changes from blue to green, green to red, or the reverse, according to its speed. This is known as the Doppler effect applied to light. Thus, it was known that color varied with motion. But no one could imagine that the concept of space, the size or the shape of objects, and their distance from one another also required modification. The Michelson-Morley experiment thus brought about a conceptual revolution in the scientific world. After this famous experiment, everything that the scientists supposed about the nature of the physical world was found to rest on very slender foundations. And this was how the classical scheme of physics first came to be questioned. The first question that troubled the physicists was this. If creatures of different planets have different ideas of the frame of space they are living in, if they see the world differently, what then is the true picture of the world? How should it look to a man in a planet which is at absolute rest? Then, in 1911, Lord Rutherford discovered that inside the atoms there was nothing but mere emptiness. There are, no doubt, electrons revolving around a nucleus, but it was found that even these consist of electromagnetic waves and nothing else. If that is so, the second question which confronted the scientists was, how is it that we all see around us objects of various shapes and colors? It was Einstein who found the solution to the first question in 1915, when he announced to the world his general theory of relativity. He demonstrated that since everything in this material universe, from the humblest speck of dust to the mighty stars and nebulae, is moving in the space at tremendous speeds, and because space and time are relative, there can be no absolute measure of length or time. Everyone thinks that he is stationary while everybody else is moving. He thinks that what he sees is the real picture of the universe, and that what others see is erroneous. In truth, however, stability, length, shape, and even color, which depends on wavelengths, are all relative. How the universe would appear to a person depends upon his position in the universe and his velocity. It follows that it is impossible for anyone to know the real nature of the universe. 4. Einstein proved not only that the shape and size of the external universe are relative, he also proved that our concept of time is relative, depending, as it does, upon the velocity of the observer in space. This can be easily understood by anyone who is conversant with advanced mathematics. From our knowledge of elementary geography, we know that if a man takes his lunch in an airplane at noon and travels from east to west with a velocity of about 1,000 miles an hour, time will appear to him to stand still. It will always be noon for him. Similarly, though not exactly for the same reason, if a man travels through the empty space of the universe with a velocity of about 1,186,000 miles per second, which is the velocity of light in empty space, time for him will stand still. Let us suppose there are two friends, one of whom travels in space with a velocity equal to that of light. While he returns to the earth after his sojourn, he will find that his friend has added to his years, but he still retains his original age. Thus, the two men have not lived the same time between their two meetings. This paradox may be verified mathematically, but it is not yet possible to verify it experimentally. On this point, Eddington says, although we cannot try the experiment of sending a man to another part of the universe, we have enough scientific knowledge to compute the rates of atomic and other physical processes in a body at rest and a body traveling rapidly. We can say definitely that the bodily processes in the traveler occur more slowly than the corresponding processes in the man at rest, i.e., more slowly according to the Astronomer Royal's time. This is not particularly mysterious. It is well known, both from theory and experiment, that the mass or inertia of matter increases when the velocity increases. The retardation is a natural consequence of the greater inertia. Thus, so far as the bodily processes are concerned, the fast-moving traveler lives more slowly. His cycle of digestion and fatigue, the rate of his muscular response to stimulus, the development of his body from youth to age, the material processes in his brain which must more or less keep step with the passage of thoughts and emotions, the watch which ticks in his waistcoat pocket, All these must be slowed down in the same ratio. If the speed of travel is very great, we may find that, whilst the stay-at-home individual is aged 70 years, the traveler has aged only 1 year. He has only found appetite for 365 breakfasts, lunches, etc. His intellect, clogged by a slow-moving brain, has only traversed the amount of thought appropriate to 1 year of terrestrial life. His watch, which gives a more accurate and scientific reckoning, confirms this. Judging by the time which consciousness attempts to measure after its own rough fashion, and I repeat, this is the only reckoning of time which we have a right to expect to be distinct from space, the two men have not lived the same time between the two meetings, the nature of the physical world. Thus, if anyone finds it possible to move in empty space with the velocity of light, he may retain his youth forever, like the ancient sages Sankhya and Sananda. In the Vishnu Purana, we read the story of Princess Revati, who lived in the Satya Yuga. When she grew up, her father went up to heaven to consult his friend Brahma about her marriage. Brahma said to him, "In course of the few months you have been here, Satya Yuga as well as Treta Yuga have passed away in the world where you live, and the Dvapara Yuga also is about to come to an end. So you go back to the earth immediately and give your daughter in marriage to Balarama, brother of Sri Krishna." Fortunately, Revati had accompanied her father to heaven, and so her age did not increase. In the Puranas there are many such stories. We learnt in our childhood that a day of the gods is equal to a human year. It is quite likely that some of the readers will say that these are merely tales and not the truth. But it seems that the sages who thought out such stories had a clear idea about the truth regarding space and time. They knew quite well that the measure of time was not the same everywhere. But this truth we do not realize easily because we have many erroneous ideas about space and time. Let us take the case of a man born both deaf and dumb. Can we say that he has no idea about time? No, he certainly has the same idea about time as we have, but being deaf and dumb, he is not able to express his ideas to another. He would not know anything about measure of time, like hours and minutes. All that he would be able to say is that he could speak is, "This is the time for this," or "This is the time for that." What we call time is really a measure of time. Strictly speaking, the real time is one and indivisible. The concept of endless time is the same as the concept of our own existence. I exist means that I am always living in endless time. The English scientists call this concept becoming, or time-lived. This is the real time. But we have seen that it is actually relative in length, like spatial length depends on velocity. This concept of relative time is an entirely personal matter. It is not realized, like other concepts from the external world, through the senses. The concept will remain even if the entire external world, including all external events and all external matters, becomes annihilated. It cannot be expressed or communicated to others. This relative or real time has thus no connection with space. In practical life, however, this realization of the concept of relative time, which is the only real time we know, has to be indicated to others at every moment, for otherwise it would not be possible for one to continue as a social being. When I see a piece of cloth, I can at once infer its length, and, so far as I am concerned, it is not necessary to measure the length at all. But if I have to express my estimate of its length, I have to adopt a unit of measurement, yard or cubit, which is understood by others. In the same manner, if I have to express to another person my concept of my relative time, I have to adopt a unit by a reference to an external event. This means that I have now to mix up time, relative time, with space. In order to do so, two things are necessary. One, I myself and that person must live at about the same space in the universe, or else our concepts of relative time will not be the same. Two, the external events mentioned above must be such as may be seen by both of us at the same time. It is on the basis of these assumptions that I can explain to others living in the same world as myself the concept of time in terms of, say, hours and minutes. These hours and minutes are units adopted for the sake of convenience only. but such units or measurements of time by means of such units would be valid for my world only. It is only a makeshift measurement of time, but in itself it is not relative, because it is identical for every one of us in this world, since I have adopted a unit on the basis of external events, like sunrise or sunset, perceived by every one of us. This is the time of our everyday use, a mixture of relative time with space. It is called by the scientists astronomical time in order to distinguish it from Einstein's relative time. I will show in Karika 33 that according to Samkhya also, this astronomical time is no time at all. Now consider how we explain this makeshift measurement of the time interval to a person living in a different world. If I may say so, there is no way whatsoever for doing so because 1, his concept of relative time does not coincide with mine, and 2, there can be no external event which can be perceived by both of us at the same time. The event which I can see now was seen by the denizens of another world perhaps thousands of millions of years ago, or it may be that it will be perceived by them thousands of millions of years hence. This is so because light has a velocity and so takes time to traverse vast distances. Thus, the inhabitants of a star, millions and millions of miles away, will see an event which took place recently in this world, such as the explosion of the atom bomb at Hiroshima, many, many years hereafter. So, if there is an explosion in the star Rohini, or Aldebaran, we shall see it many years thereafter. It follows that the division of time into present, past, and future would not be identical in all the worlds. Later on we shall see that there is no difference between the Samkhya philosophy and modern science regarding the nature of time. 3. I referred to Lord Rutherford before. In the court of scientists, Lord Rutherford, rather than Einstein, would be held responsible for the far-reaching revolution in science, which has been proceeding for the last 40 years or more. It was Lord Rutherford who proved the fundamental principle of the Samkhya philosophy, that there is nothing real in this world except energy in the form of electricity. The entire scientific world in Europe was stunned by this discovery, but at the same time this discovery has enhanced the prestige of the Samkhya philosophy. Lord Rutherford found by experimentally smashing the atom that it consists of empty space full of electrical energy. Inside the atom there is a nucleus, round which revolve some electrons, which are merely negative charges of electricity. The nucleus itself consists of protons, which are positive charges of electricity, and some electrons, except in the case of hydrogen, an atom of which consists of 1 proton and 1 electron only. Thus, a number of protons and a lesser number of electrons are cemented together to form the nucleus. The total number of protons in an atom must be equal to the number of electrons, both revolving and cemented in it. It follows that in the universe there are as many protons as electrons. It has been calculated that the total of each is of the order of 10 to the 79th power. The atom is like the solar system, the nucleus corresponding to the sun, and the revolving electrons to the planets. It is by the number of rotating electrons in an atom that the chemists identify elements. The total number of electrons in an atom determines the chemical as well as the physical properties of the element. To all intents and purposes, the nucleus of an atom is inert. The source of activity in an atom is the electron alone. In the universe, all activity and all sorts of transformations are due to the activity of the electrons. There cannot be a smaller or subtler particle of energy than an electron, which I think that's been proven differently since, but the quantum theory is now in the making. Scientists are now making endless researches about it. But we are not concerned with these researches because whatever further view is in prospect, the experimental fact will always remain the same. Viz, that energy in the form of electrical charges are the only ingredients of the physical universe. Scientific theories are always changing. The wave theory of light replaced the corpuscular theory. Heat was changed from substance, calorie, to energy of motion. Electricity was changed from fluid to nuclei of strain and ether and so forth. But all these changes of views were based on experimental facts which are unalterable. A scientific theory is like a solution of a crossword puzzle. It must fit in with the experimental facts which are unalterable and are true for all time, just as a solution of a crossword puzzle must fit in with the words given as unalterable. Even if the scheme of physics which Einstein, Bohr, Rutherford, and a galaxy of other eminent scientists are building up, even if this scheme is doomed to be replaced by a better one within the next 50 years, even then the experimental fact will remain that matter is nothing but electrons and protons, mere electric charges. It is unthinkable that science can ever revert to the old idea of a substance in the atom. This is all we want for our present purpose of studying the Samkhya Philosophy. 6. If we think of the universe as a whole, we readily see that it is ceaselessly undergoing transformation. Until the end of the creation, this transformation will go on. There is not a moment when the universe does not suffer any change. But this transformation is not merely a pointless one. The universe is, according to scientists, heading towards disorganization from an organized state. There will come a time after which there will be no transformation or change of any sort. Everything will ultimately be transformed into pure energy. There is no power known which can stop this headlong process towards complete disorganization. A green plantain ripens with time, but it is not possible by any means to make a ripe plantain green again. Just as time proceeds ceaselessly from past to future, so also the movement of energy is ceaseless towards the accomplishment of the predestined object. Energy can only move forward and never backward. With time, entropy increases, never does it decrease. This is the famous second law of thermodynamics. Entropy corresponds to change from organized state towards disorganization. So also the Samkhya philosophy states there is no end to the transformation of the Gunas, and that the said transformation has an object. It is obvious that such transformation of the Gunas, or what is the same thing as increase of entropy, cannot continue indefinitely. Just as there is a limit to tearing a piece of paper into shreds, so also there is a limit to the transformation of universal energy, that is, increase of entropy. This final state is, in the words of modern science, a state of thermodynamic equilibrium. This is nothing but the final destruction of the universe, the Mahapralaya of our Shastra. At this state there is no past, present, or future, no active energy, no light, heat, or anything. It is conceived that after this there will be an infusion of energy leading to a fresh creation. This is practically what is suggested by the science of thermodynamics. This is also what has been stated in our religious books about creation and destruction of the universe. The second law of thermodynamics is so firmly established that no scientist can ever doubt its truth. Eddington accepts this position, but has stated it very cautiously and in a roundabout manner. Scientists and theologians alike must regard as somewhat crude the native theological doctrine which, suitably disguised, is at present to be found in every textbook of thermodynamics, namely that some billions of years ago God wound up the material universe and has left it to change ever since. It is one of those conclusions which we can see no logical escape, only it suffers from the drawback that it is incredible. The Nature of the Physical World, page 90. Then again, the present course will repeat itself many times over, an infinite number of times in fact, before t reaches infinity. Don't ask me whether I really believe or expect you to believe that this will happen. Logic is logic, that's all I say. New Pathways in Science, page 62. Sir Arthur Eddington, as one of the greatest scientists of the world, cannot but say so. He cannot go beyond the scientific method of investigation. There can be no scientific investigation on the assumption that God exists and does everything by miracles. This is also the teaching of the Samkhya philosophy, that creation is cyclic. 7. It is the conclusion of modern science, based on numerous experiments, that in the universe there is nothing real except waves of electrical energy. Thus, says Eddington, it is pertinent to remember that the concept of substance has disappeared from fundamental physics. What we have ultimately come down to is a form, waves, waves, waves. Or, for a change, if we come down to the relativity theory, a curvature of space-time, and in quantum theory, a periodicity of waves. Philosophy of Physical Science, page 110. In the words of Sir James Jeans, the electric and magnetic forces are mental constructs of our own, resulting from our misguided efforts to understand the motions of the particles. Physics and Philosophy, page 200. Thus, in modern science, solid matter has successively been reduced to empty atoms, then electrical particles, then electromagnetic waves, which ultimately are shown to be forms of energy, and in the last resort, to be mere ideas. Let us, however, assume that the universe is a form of energy, and that energy has an objective existence. The question that next arises is, how then do we see so many solid objects of various shapes? On this point, the reader is referred to verses number 16 and 34 of the text, or to Eddington's New Pathways in Science. According to the relativity theory, no one can ever know what the universe is really like. Matter itself is, according to modern science, unobservable. Matter is only a sum total of electric energy which affects our senses and produces a sensation in our brain. But science is unable to elucidate the matter any further. External to ourselves there is only energy, and inside only the mind. The external energy in the form of waves strikes our eyes and other organs of senses, and then our mind feels something. This is the only relation we have with the external world. It is, to quote Eddington, as if I am living inside a fort besieged by enemies, and of all that is happening outside, I get the news only by receiving some signals. These signals, which correspond to electric waves, are like so many cipher codes which my mind deciphers, and gives them shape, color, taste, and so on, which thereafter become the subject matter of my knowledge. I feel not matter, but about matter. At the same time, I know that the waves of energy which produce such feeling have themselves neither shape nor substance, color, or any other sensory characteristic. What I feel about matter is only a creation of my mind. Cinema, radio, and television, these three modern discoveries, also demonstrate that our knowledge about matter might be entirely due to transformation of electrical energy. An uneducated man, to quote Eddington again, sometimes makes the mistake that the telegrams we receive contain writings by the hand of the person sending the message. We are making similar mistakes every moment. We think that shape, substance, taste, and smell are all adherent to matter. But in reality, there is nothing besides electromagnetic waves of different wavelengths. Shape, mass, taste, and smell do not adhere to these waves. We think very wrongly that a sweet taste adheres to an orange. Why then not say that the sense of pain also adheres to the needle with which the doctor puts some injection in the arm? Speaking of taste, color, smell, etc., we use these words in two different senses. In the first place, we mean the feelings underlying these sensations. In the second place, we mean the energy which incites these sensations. The first is a product of my mind, and the second is outside me in the form of energy. Hence, outside my mind, if there is anything real in the universe, it is only energy in some form or another. Modern science thus practically confirms the conclusion arrived at by Samkhya Philosophy. Part 2. Two fundamental considerations in understanding the Samkhya Philosophy. According to the Samkhya system, there are in all three categories of objects, padartha, namely the vyakta manifest, the avyakta unmanifest, and the purusa or purusha, the soul. The purusha is, however, included in the avyakta. According to Vachaspati, we may describe the purusha as having the characteristics of the vyakta manifest, though it is itself avyakta, unmanifest. The Purusha, that is, the individual soul, is the seer, but is without attributes or activity and is conscious. According to verse number 10, the individual souls would therefore be avyakta, unmanifest, but because they are many, they would have the characteristics of the vyakta as well, manifest. Prakriti is avyakta when she is inactive, that is, when the gunas are in equilibrium, but when the gunas are differentiated, she is active and hence vyakta. Hence, ultimately, we have only two categories, namely the vyakta and the avyakta. The vyakta comprises the entire universe, everything contained in it, whether it is perceived or only inferred. The avyakta in the Samkhya philosophy indicates the ultimate cause which itself has no cause, the causa causans. The adherents of the Samkhya system hold that there can be no effect without cause. There must be a cause behind the vyakta, and evidently this cause will have another, and the second cause will have a third one, and so on. But there must be an ultimate cause which itself is uncaused. Otherwise, there would be no end of the chain of causal relation. The avyakta, or unmanifest, is thus the ultimate cause of the creation. See Karika 15. Samkhya's avyakta, or unmanifest, thus corresponds to Brahman of the Vedanta. Vide Gaudapada on verse number 22. Hence, avyakta is cause, while vyakta is the effect. Again, avyakta, or the unmanifest, is without cause, ahitumat, and vyakta caused, hitumat. By reasonable inference, it follows that whatever is without cause must be infinite, endless, indivisible, one, inconceivable, and inactive, and immanent in everything else. It cannot be otherwise. This is what has been indicated in verse number 10. For similar reasons, it will be seen that whatever is caused must have characters opposite to those of the avyakta, and that it must be included in and pervaded by the avyakta. Its existence itself would be dependent on avyakta, the unmanifest. This antithesis between cause and effect has been explained in Karika 14, to which I shall presently refer. An effect always remains latent in its cause, and in proper time it is revealed by the activity of the cosmic power. This separation of the effect from the cause in which it was latent is called creation, sarga, in the Samkhya philosophy. The cosmic power, or the primeval energy, with its three modes of action which brings about this separation, is called the prakriti. The activity of the gunas, that is, their transformation, has no respite. Just as a clock, when set in motion, goes on by itself, so also, once the gunas commence to act, they continue to do so indefinitely, according to fixed laws, until the final object is reached. In the Samkhya philosophy, 23 separate stages of such transformation have been described, so that the process of the transformation may be properly understood. These stages are Mahat Tattva, Ahamkara Tattva, etc. Vide verse number 3. As soon as the gunas are in action, i.e., as soon as creation begins, along with the prakriti, Purushas, or rather the Purusha, also become manifest. It is stated in verse number 11 that the activity of the primeval energy is threefold, three gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas. Activity is the same thing as the three well-known modes of action of nature, Newton's three laws of motion. At the earliest stage, the Purusha is in a state which may be described as a trance or stupefaction. The Purusha is stupefied, as it were, by the wiles of Prakriti, in the words of Gaudapada on verse number 40. At this stage, the Purusha remains latent in the Prakriti. Strictly speaking, there is no sense in saying that the Purusha remains latent in the Prakriti, but I am forced to use this expression for want of a better one. At this stage in the process of creation, there was neither time nor space. And so how can we think of two different things existing independently at that stage? The concept of individuality is dependent on the concept of space. We are unable to think or express ourselves without recourse to the concepts of time and space. For this reason, I was compelled to say that the Purushas in the aggregate, were then latent in the Prakriti. At the same time, it is not correct to refer to Purushas in the plural. There can be no idea of separateness or plurality in the absence of the concept of space. The mind in the absence of the concept of space cannot comprehend distinction. No human language can express this pre-creation stage of the universe. The individual souls, Purushas, are not separate or distinct from one another at this stage. Purushas in the aggregate and the Prakriti remain in a state of coalescence. This stage is designated the Mahat Tattva in the Samkhya Philosophy. This is the consciousness of the collective ego. This is the state of affairs also at the stage of the final destruction of the universe. The Mahat Tattva of the Samkhya has been termed Hiranyagarbha and Virat Purusha in the Puranas. The Samkhya philosophers have no objection to the terms Hiranyagarbha and Virat Purusha. All they insist on is that just before creation, everything in the universe, animate or inanimate, is in the Mahat Tattva in an inchoate state, collectively without any sort of individuality. On creation, all these become manifest in different forms. This receives confirmation in modern science also. Thus, Jeans says in his Physics and Philosophy, page 204, the new quantum mechanics may perhaps give a hint. In each case, space and time are inhabited by different individuals. But when we pass beyond space and time, from the world of phenomena to reality, individuality is replaced by community. So it may be with life. The phenomena may be individuals carrying on separate existence in space and time, while in the deeper reality beyond space and time, we may all be members of one body. This statement of Jeans cannot be lightly brushed aside. What he has stated can be appreciated if we keep in mind the findings of wave mechanics. Eddington, in his Philosophy of Physical Science, Chapter 10, has briefly indicated the arguments. Compare in this connection the Gita 8:18. The stage subsequent to the Mahat Tattva is termed Ahamkara Tattva in Samkhya Philosophy. The word subsequent no doubt implies an idea of time which was non-existent at this stage, but there is no way out. At this stage, we have for the first time the idea of individuality in Purushas, who were so far, as it were, in a trance in the Prakriti. An idea of separate individual existences succeeds the collective ego. This idea of individuality is at the root of the concepts of space and time. I am an individual Purusha implies two concepts, namely, first, that I am, i.e., I always exist. This leads to the concept of time. And, secondly, I am different from others, which leads to the concept of space. Necessarily, the idea that I am different leads to the consciousness of the existence of other Purushas. Clearly, concept of space means an idea of externality. There can be no concept of space in the absence of an external object. Vide Pankadasi 2:42-45. But this is not a tenet of our Shastras alone. It is the conclusion of the modern relativity theory also. Thus, Jeans says, for Einstein, space cannot exist without objects. You cannot have space without things or things without space. Whitehead. When the jiva, or the individual soul, is in the ahamkara tattva, the concepts of both time and space arise. These two concepts are at the root of all knowledge. Without the underlying concept of space and time, it is not possible to understand anything, to think or speak of anything. At the same time, it is not possible to separate this concept of time from that of space. One is a part of the other and includes it. See notes on Karika 33. The next stage of creation is dichotomous. On the one hand, from the Ahamkara Tattva evolves the sense organs, or indriyas, and the mind, Antarakarana, and on the other hand, the tanmatras. That is to say, at this stage of creation, the energy of the three gunas of Prakriti bifurcates into two forms, one very subtle and the other gross. The subtler energy creates the sense world, or bhavakaya sarga. The gross energy, which has been called here the tanmatras, constitute the entire physical universe, which Samkhya calls limgatya, or tanmatra sarga. Vide Karika 32. The Puranas say that energy in the form of tanmatras evolved from the ego sense of the Virat Purusha. The idea was no doubt taken from the above cosmology of the Samkhya philosophy. According to Samkhya, therefore, thoughts and emotions of the sense world and gross energy, tanmatras of the physical world, are in substance one and the same thing, having emanated from the same source. They are therefore mutually convertible. We can convert thought into energy or energy into thought, just as we can convert light into electricity and vice versa. The tanmatra derives its name from the fact that it is the smallest fraction of the primordial energy of Prakriti, the Gunas collectively. Thus, according to Samkhya, energy acts in quanta. All material objects we see around us are composed of tanmatras alone. Matter is an assemblage of tanmatras only. Matter exists in 5 states. 1. Solid, kasiti. 2. Liquid, apa. 3. Luminous, tejas. 4. Gaseous, vayu. And 5. Space, akasha. These states are called the 5 mahabhutas. The same matter may exist in all these 5 states, e.g., a piece of lead is solid at first. When heated, it becomes liquid. Further heated, it becomes red hot. Further heated, it becomes a gas, and finally it disappears into empty space as tanmatras, or electrons. Part 3. The Samkhya philosophy is not atheistic. The Samkhya philosophy is a system based on reason, but such reason is not transcendental reason as in the Vedanta. It is just common sense. It is with such reason that the Samkhya system has thought out the real nature of the universe and of the soul. The basic reasoning of the system is incorporated in verses numbers 10, 11, and 14. In order to understand the philosophy of the Samkhya system, we have to depend on the reasoning put forward in the system itself, and not on the dialectics obtaining in other systems of philosophy. The Samkhya philosophy has been misrepresented by many because they failed to keep this fact in view. At the very outset, it is important to understand verses numbers 10 and 11, which deal with the difference between the avyakta and the vyakta, that is, between the unmanifested and the manifested. I have shown that the manifested in the Samkhya philosophy means the entire physical universe, whether it is perceived or merely inferred. Whatever is beyond this is the unmanifested, the avyakta. In the words of science, the vyakta would mean the 4-dimensional space-time continuum, or the phenomenal world and everything it contains, and avyakta, the reality above space-time. We are to keep in mind that beyond the physical universe there is neither time nor space. Time and space are inseparably connected with matter, which again, can exist only in time and space. As pointed out above, the characteristics of the avyakta are just the opposite of those of the vyakta. Why this should be so has been discussed in verse number 14. It is said that all this is due to the display of the 3 modes of action of nature, viz. The 3 gunas. It is the gunas that make all the distinction between a vyakta and the avyakta. Now I become conscious of an object only when some energy coming from it impinges on my sense organs. This is what is taught by modern science, and this also is Samkhya's own psychology. Karika 28. Thus, according to Samkhya, objects are visible and knowable, and are subject matters of our senses only because they can transmit energy, without which there will be nothing to distinguish them from the avyakta. It may be remembered that in modern science, objects are so many bubbles of bottled-up energy, to borrow a term from genes, floating in empty space like soap bubbles in the sky. We thus find in Karika 14, read with Karika number 10, yet another distinction between the vyakta and the avyakta. Vyakta is active, sakriya, and therefore non-conscious, asatana, being subject matters of our senses, while the avyakta is without action, niskriya, and therefore not an object to be seen, and for the reason of that it is the conscious seer itself. The idea is that in this world everything can be classified either as the seer or the seen, the enjoyer of the enjoyed, manifested or the unmanifested, conscious or non-conscious, So, if anything is not the one, it must be the other. This, then, is the distinction drawn by the Samkhya between the conscious, satana, and the non-conscious, asatana. This distinction is difficult to understand not only for the ordinary man, but also for the learned. This is not only natural because our experience tells us that it is only the animate conscious beings which are active and which can move about. We consider only such things as non-conscious which are inactive and which cannot move by themselves. But our experience is now contradicted by the Samkhya. According to the Samkhya, whatever is inactive is conscious, and everything which is active is non-conscious. But science now supports Samkhya because everything in this world is in a state of motion due to its inherent energy. The Samkhya propounded, and science proved, that there is a constant movement inside all the atoms constituting the universe. The Gunas are, by their very nature, ever transforming themselves, and there is no cessation of this transformation. We also know that what is matter is nothing but a threefold activity of energy, sattva, rajas, and tamas, or mass, momentum, and stress. It is a common experience that everything in this world suffers change and ultimately destruction. How can there be any change in the absence of inherent activity? How can there be destruction? There is nothing in this world which is inactive, and it is not even possible to imagine anything which is completely so. But beyond the phenomenal world, there is no play of energy. Hence, it is quite possible that in the avyakta stage, there may be something inactive, but it must be remembered that that something will be beyond space and time also, and for the reason of that, it must be an undivided, homogeneous, one single existence. At the very outset, therefore, Samkhya, in verse 10, propounded that the avyakta which is causeless is always one and always inactive. Since it is inactive, the one is eternal, for there can be no change or destruction without some sort of activity. According to the reasoning made out in the verse just referred to, this one is all-pervading, independent, indivisible, and so on. It is inactive and hence invisible, not being an object of perception or sight. It is the seer itself. This conclusion of the Samkhya fits in with the finding of modern science that in this subjective world of ours, the only objective element is consciousness and consciousness alone. So, proceeding on the basis of what may be called just common sense, the Samkhya has reached the conclusion that beyond the universe there is one thing, padartha, which is eternal and all-pervading. That one thing is inactive, conscious, and is the seer, i.e. consciousness itself. For such reasons, Gaudapada identified the avyakta of the Samkhya with the Brahman of the Vedas. It would thus follow that the conclusions of both these systems are fundamentally the same. My friend Manoranjana Shastri has also shown that at first it was held that there was no fundamental difference between the Samkhya and the Vedanta. He writes, in ancient times, the Samkhya philosophy and the Vedanta formed one system and were interdependent. In Narasimha Swami's Samkhya Taru Vasanta, a commentary on the Samkhya-Karika, it was shown that there was fundamentally no difference between the Samkhya and the Vedanta. Later commentators, however, lost sight of all these considerations, and they identified avyakta with prakriti. According to these commentators, the prakriti is always unmanifested, avyakta, and always non-conscious. They explain verse 15 to mean that the non-conscious prakriti is the ultimate cause of the universe. So they draw the necessary inference that because the ultimate cause of the universe is non-conscious, the Samkhya philosophy must be atheistic. Those commentators do not admit that the avyakta cannot but be conscious, as has been shown earlier. Even if we can conceive of a separate existence of the prakriti at the avyakta stage, even then the said prakriti must be conscious. In the Tantras, that prakriti has been named the primeval prakriti, or Mahamaya, and it has been shown that there is no difference between Shiva and Shakti, and that the two are fundamentally identical. If verse 10 is explained correctly, prakriti cannot be understood as avyakta, because avyakta, of the Samkhya, is inactive, unchanging, real, and causeless. Though Prakriti is so before the creation, she is active and always changing from the beginning of the creation up to its end. Prakriti as such has never been termed avyakta in the Samkhya. In Karika 11, Samkhya has distinctly stated that this Prakriti, or Pradhana, has all the attributes of the Vyakta. The word avyakta, or unmanifest, occurs in the Karikas only 5 times, namely in verses 2, 10, 14, 15, and 58. In every place, avyakta means the state before creation, that is, the state when the Purusa and the Prakriti are united together in one entity. Gaudapada, an Advaitin or monist, was fully conscious of this, but still he used the word Prakriti to mean the avyakta in Karika 58. But he was careful to state that Prakriti, Pradhana, Maya, Avyakta, and Brahman all mean the same thing. Verse 21. The later commentators did not identify Avyakta with the Brahman of the Vedanta. They left out the Brahman altogether and identified Prakriti alone with the Avyakta. Why the commentators explained verse number 15 in this way I cannot comprehend. In verse 21, it has been clearly stated that the ultimate cause of the universe is neither the Purusa alone nor the Prakriti alone. Creation is due to the union of the two. The matter is made quite clear by the Gita, chapter 14, verse 8. Vachaspati himself states that the union of Prakriti and Purusa is without beginning and end, and that the creation of the universe is due to this union. This state of union is the Avyakta stage. In this union, it is not possible to point out the Purusa or the Prakriti as an individual entity. Avyakta evidently refers to the state before the creation. Again, in verse 3 and 17, as well as verse 11, it has been clearly stated that the Avyakta is the Purusa. Again, in verse 3 and 17, as well as in verse 11, it has been clearly stated that Avyakta is the Purusa. Then again, all the commentators agree that the yoga system of Patanjali is theistic, but it is well known that, as regards creation, there is no difference whatsoever between the two systems. Vide my Vedanta Darsana, page 114 through 116. Then, how is it that the Samkhya system is considered atheistic while the yoga system is admitted to be theistic? The learned commentators have not given any convincing reason. In the Patanjala system, the word Ishvara has been used once, but the word has not been used in the Samkhya. This is the only difference between the two schools. Patanjali merely states that if we concentrate our mind on a particular person, or Purusha Visesha, called Ishvara, our mind would thereby become fixed. But in this philosophy, there is nothing to show that this particular person had anything to do with the creation of the universe. As a matter of fact, there could be no Ishvara with attributes, or Saguna, before the creation, and none at the time of the final destruction. Saguna Ishvara, that is, Ishvara with attributes, is only a Purusha subject to the Maya of the Prakriti like ourselves. The only difference is that we are powerless under the influence of the Maya, while Ishvara is not. Vide my Gita, 2nd edition, page 112. According to the Vedanta, also, qualified Saguna Ishvara had no hand in the matter of creation. The entire creation is merely a thought of the unqualified or Nirguna Brahman. Again, it should be noted that the Samkhya uses 3 words, more or less of identical import, viz. Jna, Puman, and Purusha. Jna means Atman or pure consciousness. According to the Samkhya, Jna, Puman, and Purusha all mean the all-pervading consciousness, and all are avyakta, unmanifested. Gaudapada, the uncompromising monist, at once identified Puman with Brahman and Purusha with the seer, the Jivatman, and explained that according to the Samkhya there is no distinction between the Jivatman and the Paramatman, or Brahman. Other commentators have not discussed this important question. Had they entered into the question, they would have had to face the query, how can the non-conscious Prakriti be the ultimate cause of the universe if it is admitted that an all-pervading consciousness, or Shakti, existed everywhere? There is another point to note. It is not clear what the commentators understood by the word guna. It is generally admitted that in the manifested matter there is nothing besides the three gunas. It is also admitted that the gunas are the only workers of all changes or transformation in the world. Colebrook explained that the gunas as the three constituent elements, and up to the present his explanation has held the field in the universities. But what are those constituent elements? Samkhya has divided all the constituents of the world into 24 categories, the 24 tattvas, and there cannot be any other constituent elements besides these. Moreover, now that we know that words like elements, substance, or matter have disappeared from modern physics never again to return, it is high time that Colebrook's definition of the word guna should be revised. It cannot be accepted without further elucidation. It has been suggested by some that, objects being nothing more than an assemblage of their primary qualities, the gunas of the Samkhya philosophy must be held to be identical with those qualities: pleasure, pain, and indifference. This idea is also contradicted by modern psychology, which has abolished all primary and secondary qualities of matter and reduced them to mere ideas of the mind, as explained in Part 1 of the introduction. Moreover, it is difficult to understand how the qualities which have no objective existence, apart from a human mind, could be the cause of all the changes and transformations in the physical world. Samkhya itself says in Karika 38 that the tanmatras, i.e. the smallest divisible fractions of the gunas, give rise to pleasure, pain, or indifference in a human mind. This is quite in accordance with the teachings of modern psychology. Thus it seems to me that we have not as yet got any clear idea of the meaning in which the word guna has been used in the Samkhya philosophy. The only plausible explanation of the term, so far as I know, has been given by Sri Aurobindo, who thinks that gunas are the three essential modes of action of nature, corresponding no doubt to the three laws of motion of Newton's dynamics. If we accept this definition, the whole Samkhya philosophy becomes easy to understand. Not only so, but one will be surprised to find how most of its truths have now been experimentally verified by modern science. But 30 years ago, all this was not known, and so it is not to be wondered at that many considered the Samkhya philosophy to be a system devoid of meaning. This is how Samkhya philosophy became to many not only meaningless, but also atheistic. Whatever defects there might be in this system, it is neither meaningless nor atheistic. The system has successfully come out in this matter from the searching criticism of the sage Badarayana. The sage criticized the Samkhya system in 4 places in his sutras, but nowhere has he even suggested that the Samkhya philosophy is either meaningless or atheistic. Sankara Acharya has also leveled severe criticism against the system, but even he has not said a word to the effect that the Samkhya philosophy is either meaningless or atheistic. He fully realized that if the Samkhya be atheistic, he would himself be so. Neither Sankaracharya nor Kevala was an atheist. Both were supertheists. After bitterly criticizing the Samkhya and the Yoga systems, Sankaracharya reaches this conclusion: the Samkhya and the Yoga systems are both well known to be the means of realizing the ultimate object of man, that is, salvation. Samkhya means knowledge and Yoga concentration. Brahman can be realized by knowledge and concentration. This is admitted by the Upanishads. I must admit those portions of the Samkhya and the Yoga which are not opposed to the Srutis. The Purusa of the Samkhya is Nirguna. I unreservedly accept this. I also accept the instructions offered by the Yoga regarding Sama, Dhamma, etc. Vide Samkara on Brahmasutra 2, 1, and 3. But is there anything in the Samkhya which is opposed to the Shrutis or Srutis? Is there any real challenge of the Samkhya system in the Brahma Sutras? I have answered these questions in many places of my Vedanta Darshana. The Vedanta does not admit the objectivity of the Prakriti. As a matter of fact, modern science also does not admit the objectivity of energy. Energy, which is identical with the Prakriti of the Samkhya, is, according to modern science, only a mental concept. Vedanta says exactly the same thing. In Vedanta, the Prakriti of Samkhya has been termed Anumana, that is, what is only inferred. In Brahma Sutra 1.1.5, Prakriti is termed asabdam. This means that there is no mention of Prakriti in the Srutis. This is the first reference of the Samkhya system in the Brahma Sutras. The second reference is in Sutras chapter 1, 4, 1-12. Here, all the Upanishads were critically considered, but nowhere was any reference to the Prakriti of the Samkhya found. It is concluded that there is a seeming reference to Prakriti of the Samkhya in 3 places. Actually, the reference was to something else. The third reference to the Samkhya system is in Sutras chapter 2, 1-3. Here also it is stated that there is no mention of the Prakriti of the Samkhya as a separate identity in any smriti, such as the Manu Samhita. The Brahma Sutras have referred to the Samkhya system for the fourth and the last time in chapter 2, 1-10. Here the underlying reason of the Samkhya philosophy in support of its principal tenets have been discussed. We find in the Brahma Sutras themselves that according to the Samkhya, the world is a creation of nature, and that everything in this world happens according to natural laws, which regulate every detail. The Brahma Sutras do not raise any objection against this, neither is it stated that the reasonings of the Samkhya philosophy are in any manner defective. It is only stated that it is not necessary to admit an unreal category like the non-conscious Prakriti, for everything in this phenomenal world happens as it is ordained in the mind of the Brahman. Everything is verily the Brahman. This is enough to explain everything. According to the Vedanta itself, the Prakriti of Samkhya is the Maya, the quintessence of the incomprehensible power of the Brahman, which effects the creation. All this can be comprehended, and this is also what the Samkhya propounds. In Karika number 61, it is clearly stated that Prakriti is the phenomenal cause of the universe. Vide my analysis of the Karika. In Karika number 61, it is clearly stated that Prakriti is the phenomenal cause of the universe. Vide my analysis of the Karika. In Karika 48, it has been distinctly said that to regard Prakriti as the ultimate reality is a sort of ignorance, or avidya. But to understand all this, we have first to assume that Prakriti is real, and then gradually proceed on the basis of that assumption. This is the only way in which we can discuss the matter scientifically. It is on the basis of Newton's materialistic physics that Einstein succeeded in raising the structure of his idealistic theory. It is only recently that the scientists have realized that even energy has no real existence. Mere uttering of the Vedantic aphorism that all is Brahman will only benefit those who have the equipment mentioned in the introduction to the Brahma Sutra. For others, it will only impede their spiritual progress. For, as it is said, this, which I can't read because I don't know what Brahma Sutra verse that is, but this is so because the human mind is so constituted that it cannot comprehend anything which does not fit in with his own sense world, with his own worldly experience and his predispositions. It is for this reason that philosophy, logic, mathematics, and all the other sciences are necessary in order to realize the ultimate reality of which the Vedanta speaks. But Vedanta is not a philosophy at all. It is a super philosophy where there is no room for any scientific discussion or arguments, without which the ordinary human mind will not be convinced. For this reason, the Samkhya has strictly followed the scientific method of investigation and has proceeded on the assumption that Prakriti is real. For, without assuming the objectivity of space, time, and energy, no scientific discussion is possible. If the Samkhya philosophy is explained on the basis of common sense, there arises no difficulty whatsoever. But instead of doing so, if we proceed on the assumption that the Samkhya is atheistic, it would never be possible to get at the real intention sought to be conveyed by the author. It would lead to useless controversy, and of such controversy there will be no end. Part 4. Samkhya's idea of creation. We can reasonably infer, says Gaudapada, Karika 6, that the Purusa guides Prakriti in all her actions. Otherwise, she being inanimate could not create a world. Later on, quoting from the ancient text Shasti Tantra, he said, i.e. Prakriti only when organized by the intelligent Purusa can be effective. From such statements, however, it will be quite wrong for the reader to imagine that all acts of Prakriti and all her transformations are, according to Samkhya, really the work of God. Samkhya does not say so. It actually contradicts the idea. I do not say that it will be far too wrong to suppose that everything is ordained by God and that not a leaf can fall against his will. I say, on the other hand, that a man who has not realized this great truth has no need to read any philosophy at all. He has understood all. He has understood that Prakriti is in reality the will of God. So says the Vedanta, and so says the Gita also. For such a man who has realized the self, the Samkhya philosophy has not been written. It has been written for ignorant people with a view to lead them step by step from gross matters to subtler things, until they can understand what the soul is. Samkhya, therefore, begins with gross matters and goes slowly up until it reaches the three modes of action of nature. It shows how the whole creation is the work of nature, a transformation of the three gunas from a highly organized state to a completely disorganized one. Thus, its method of treatment of the subject, and its conclusions also, are the same as those of modern science. Here, in its philosophy, we find the quantum theory, the relativity theory, the second law of thermodynamics, the theory of space-time, and all such things. The only thing we do not find is God himself. By this, however, the reader is not to infer that the Samkhya is an atheistic philosophy. Its main point is that the avyakta Brahman is static and not the doer of any action. This idea of creation helps a man in the path of God realization. It makes it easy for him to realize, 1, that the soul is inactive and is a mere seer, see Karika 19, and 2, that there is no difference between the soul and the Brahman, both being the same eternal and all-pervading consciousness itself. 3, that man is not a doer of his action. The three great modes of action of Prakriti work through him, in Karika 19 or Gita chapter 3 verse 5. Lest we should forget that these three great truths, so essential for self-realization, Gaudapada has been reminding us from time to time that nothing in nature is done by God, and that all transformations of Prakriti are of our own making. See his notes on Karikas 31, 27, and 61. The crux of the whole philosophy of Samkhya lies in the above cryptic passage quoted by Gaudapada from the Sastri Tantra, which is believed to be the original text from which the Karikas of Ishvara Krishna derive their authority. The clear meaning of this passage, as I said above, is that energy cannot do any work unless an intelligent man directs it into a proper channel. This is a great scientific truth and is a matter of our everyday experience. We know that energy not so directed can only dissipate itself, and if it can create anything, it can create only a chaos but never an orderly cosmos. Then again, in his exposition of Karika 27, Gaudapada has shown the Gunas, when organized, can work like an intelligent person with caution and pre-thought. Now that we have got so many man-made machines which work like intelligent persons, e.g. the electric secretary, the robot soldier, the robot doctor, and the like, we require no further confirmation of what Gaudapada says. Furthermore, in Karika 42, it is said that Prakriti has a wonderful power to do all things by her Vibhuti Yoga. Verily, the Vibhuti Yoga of Prakriti means that no action can be done without application of energy, and at the same time there is nothing in the world which an intelligent man cannot do with properly organized energy. This statement requires no verification when we consider that by means of properly organized energy, even human scientists are now about to break earthly bonds and conquer space with their rockets. There is every prospect for their being able to do more. According to Samkhya, therefore, this universe is a vast organization of the Avyakta Brahman, in which every action, every event in space-time, including our birth, death, and rebirth, is a continuous natural process carried on by Prakriti with her three gunas. And Brahman only devised the organization once for all and did nothing more. In its discussion in Karika 17, Samkhya has made it clear that although the Avyakta Purusha has thus completely concealed himself from our view, his presence can easily be felt in the inevitable law and order that prevail all over the universe. This is also Vedanta's own idea, for according to Vedanta, Brahman is nirguna, static. The universe evolved out of a thought of his, and all subsequent events in space-time are the work of his Maya, or Prakriti. Thus, one Upanishad actually says that though, according to sages who know, the whole creation is an act of nature, yet its ultimate cause is Brahman. Svetasvatara Tantra 6.1. Part 5. The Three Gunas. When a ray of sodium light strikes the retina, the light energy is transformed into the energy of an electrical impulse which passes along the optic nerves to the cerebral centers. There it gives our mind the impression of the yellow color, and this impression is stored forever in our subconscious mind as a thought of the yellow. The subconscious mind of the new psychology of modern science is the same as the samskara of Indian philosophy. We can recall the thought afterwards to our consciousness when we want, or it appears by itself to us in our dreams, when it becomes a living thought. Otherwise, it lies stored in the subconscious mind with many other such thoughts of which we are not aware at all. We now know more at present about the nature of our thoughts. Recently, however, biochemists of America are beginning to make extensive researches about the nature of thoughts by studying the electric eels which abound in that country. These electric eels, it has been found, can stun or kill their prey from a distance by discharging electricity from their bodies. This gives a cue to the scientists for discovering how thoughts arise and how impulses are translated into action. If the experiment proves successful, it may lead support to what the ancient thinkers of India said about the nature of thoughts thousands of years ago. I have said before that according to the Samkhya Philosophy, thoughts and energy are only two forms of the same thing. Energy gives rise to thoughts, and thoughts become energy when they come out from the mind. That is how yogis are said to be possessed of power to do wonderful things merely by thinking. The only difference between thoughts and energy, as I said before, is that thoughts are very subtle energy, i.e. in modern language, vibrations of very high frequencies, which our sense organs cannot receive, while gross energy, which strikes our sense organs, are vibrations of lower frequencies. Both being the same energy, it follows that their activity must be governed by the same laws. We know from dynamics that in the physical world, activity of energy is governed by three well-known laws, to which I referred above as Newton's three laws of motion. In classical physics, they are called inertia, acceleration, and reaction, and in modern physics, mass or energy, momentum, and stress. It is difficult to explain to a layman what mass or momentum or stress mean, although the meaning of the terms is crystal clear to a scientist who knows how nature works. Samkhya has explained how the same threefold activity of nature exists also in the sense world. Thus, says Sri Aurobindo, the idea of the three essential modes of nature is a creation of the ancient Indian thinkers, and its truth is not at once obvious because it was the result of long psychological experiment and profound internal experience. These modes are termed in Indian books qualities or gunas, and were given the names sattva, rajas, and tamas. Ordinarily used for psychological self-analysis, these distinctions are valid also in physical nature. Essays on the Gita. The terms sattva, rajas, and tamas, which apply equally to the action of energy and thoughts, will perhaps be better understood if we first look into our own mind. 1. When our mind is in its normal state of rest or tranquility, we feel pleasure or delight. This condition of the mind, along with the pleasure or the delight, has been brought about by thought waves moving in a certain way. We call this action of thoughts sattva guna. It corresponds to inertia of the physical world. Inertia does not mean inertness, but it is an effort of a moving body to remain in its own state of rest or motion. 2. When again thoughts are in motion, i.e. when too many thoughts enter our mind, there is agitation and this is painful. We call this action rajas, equivalent to Newton's acceleration. 3. Then again, when dark thoughts, e.g. violent anger or lust, enter into our minds, they bring about a retardation of the normal functions of the mind. In the physical world, such action of energy would be called reaction, Newton's third law of motion. Samkhya called such action tamas, or tamas. This gives rise to ignorance, moha of all sorts. When applied to the material world of physics, the functions of these three gunas are as follow. 1. Sattva illumines moving bodies in their true position, prakasa. 2. Rajas is action, using the word action in its scientific sense, which brings about change or destruction. It is thus active, pravriti. And 3. Tamas is retardation of action, niyama. These gunas, being only three modes of action of the same energy, cannot be thought of separately. Whenever there is any action in the world, all the three gunas are there working together in harmony, only one guna working at a time, and the other two helping the first. Karikas 12 and 13. As an illustration, let us consider how a tree grows. It grows by the action of the rajas, or acceleration. But if this were all, it would go on growing forever, and there would be no limit to its growth, and it will grow to its full height in no time. This is not how a tree grows. What actually happens is that when it grows a little, sattva guna comes into play, for its tendency is to keep a body in its own state of motion or rest. Then tamas comes to the aid of sattva, and both of them acting together retard the growth for a moment. But as soon as retardation starts, sattva guna, acting with rajas, overcomes the retardation, and the tree again begins to grow, and again it is checked, and so on. These processes of acceleration and retardation follow in quick succession, and the tree grows slowly but surely. This is how nature works. In passing, I may point out that according to Samkhya, thought, being only a form of energy, is as inanimate, asatana, as any other material object. The reservoir of all thoughts, the mind, or more correctly the buddhi, is also necessarily inanimate, asatana. But it seems to be possessed of consciousness on account of its contact with the conscious Purusa. See Karika 20. In Western philosophy, thoughts and consciousness are different aspects of the same thing, of the same consciousness. Eddington, Philosophy of Physical Science, pages 202 through 205. This makes all the difference between Eastern and Western psychology. Samkhya's view helps a man whose object is self-realization. It makes it easy for him to differentiate the buddhi from the soul. Part 6, Plurality of Soul. This subject, plurality of soul, in Karika number 18, has been seized upon and made a ground of attack against Samkhya philosophy by various commentators from the beginning of history. But let us first see how Vedanta solved this important question. According to the monism of Vedanta, also, there is no difference between the Brahman and the soul being nothing but pure and indivisible consciousness itself. The question then arose that if all jivas have only a common soul, how is it then that all of them do not behave in the same way, have not the same sort of cognition, do not do the same act and enjoy the same fruit, and so forth? In short, how is it then that the world is not as nonsensical as it should have been, if all men were to have one common soul? The matter was fully discussed in Chapter 2, Part 3 of the Brahma Sutra, and Samkhya solved the problem by saying that our perception is not at all a function of the functionless consciousness, but it is a function of the antakarana. Brahma Sutra, Chapter 2, Part 3, verse 32. We see the world as our mind shows it. His conclusion, as I have shown above, is supported by modern science, for science also has proved by experiment that the world of physics is a mental phenomenon. Thus, monism and science have both agreed that the physical universe is mental and therefore unreal. The only difference being that science does not know why this world should be subjective or mental, while monism says that it is so because all men have a common soul. This solution of monism was not accepted by the other great teachers like Ramanuja, because, according to their old psychology, mental perception was possible only in dreams. In the waking state, an object, in order to be seen, must really exist as an object before our eyes. They, therefore, contended that we are not living in a dream world, that we are, all of us, not dreaming the same dream at a time, that the world must be real, and that things must be what they are to our view. Their solution of the above problem, therefore, was that the jiva is not merely consciousness itself, but he is consciousness enveloped in the linga sarira, i.e. in the sensory equipment. If we take this definition of jiva, then, of course, there is no doubt that the world is as we see it, and that it is absolutely real. Here, the only drawback is that this conclusion is not supported by modern science. For science says, to welter in a barren realism of the world is a negation of all that physical science has accomplished in unraveling the complexity of sensory experience. Eddington and New Pathways in Science. Now, returning to the Samkhya philosophy, it cannot accept the first solution, viz. The solution of monism, for the obvious reason that Samkhya had begun its investigation was assuming that the world is real. It was only at the end of the investigation that we were told that we actually see the world as our mind or buddhi shows it. See my notes under Karika 19. This is exactly the procedure of science, to begin by taking things as they are, and then arrive at the reality. Samkhya cannot accept the second solution, viz. That the Purusa, or jiva, is an assemblage of consciousness and linga sarira, for it would cut at the very root of his philosophy, whose only object is to make God realization easy for the ordinary man by discriminating the soul from the linga from the very beginning. Accordingly, he said that from the purpose of his high inquiry, it was not necessary at that stage to know what the soul really is, that being a matter which is under inquiry, that in the meantime we could take things as they are and accept the known fact that men behave differently. They all do not die at the same time, they have different sorts of cognition, and so forth. We can, it went on to say, therefore, take it that each man has a soul, without knowing the exact nature of the soul. He could not have done better without admitting the world to be unreal. Sri Aurobindo has put the whole matter in a nutshell when he says, but the infinite difference of view and outlook and attitude, action and experience, a difference not of the natural operations which are the same, but of the witnessing consciousness, are utterly inexplicable except on the supposition that there is a multiplicity of witnesses, many Purushas. The only at all logical explanation from the point of view of Vedantic monism is that of the Mayavada, but there the whole thing becomes a dream. The more realistic Samkhya view of things does not admit this phantasmagoric idea of existence, and therefore cannot adopt this solution. Essays on the Gita. Part 7, Samkhya's Psychology. I had on occasion a little while ago to refer to the old Indian psychology, which was also the psychology of Europe, according to which energy emanating from the sense organs goes to the object to be seen, seizes it, and brings a picture of it, which is presented to the mind. The mind reads the picture, and then cognition ensues. This old psychology has now been discarded in Europe after a long series of controversy between the philosophers and the scientists there. It is highly interesting and more highly instructive to follow these controversies. The curious reader is referred to Miss Stebbing's Philosophy and the Physicists, and Eddington's The New Pathways in Science. A very brief account of the psychology has been given in Part 1 of this introduction. It has now been firmly established by experiments that nothing goes out from our sense organs. These organs possess no energy to transmit. They are merely apertures, as it were, through which energy emitted by external objects enters into the cerebral centers. I have already shown that according to this new psychology, we are living, as it were, in a prison house from which we see nothing of the external world, except insofar as we receive some electromagnetic vibrations, which our mind turns into shapes, colors, and attributes, thus making these appear as solid objects to our vision. Accordingly, if we see anything, we see the mind, and all the subsequent processes are only inferences made by the mind. Eddington says, mind is the first and the most direct thing in our experience. All else is remote inference. This new psychology is exactly what the old Samkhya philosophy teaches us. For in Karika, it has been clearly said that energy transmitted by the objects falls on our sense organs and produces a sensation which is quite indeterminate and is without any form or attribute. Samkhya calls this sensation alokana. To this alokana, the mind adds form, qualifications, and attributes, and then only we can have cognition of the object. See Karika 28. Thus, according to Samkhya, also, our knowledge of external objects is only a process of mind spinning, a phrase from Eddington. According to Samkhya, also, we see nothing but our mind, buddhi. In Karika 19, the Purusa has been defined as the seer of the buddhi. He sees the buddhi and nothing else. So far, therefore, Samkhya's psychology supports the new psychology of Europe. But there is an important difference. I've shown above that sensation and cognition are, both of them, functions of the buddhi. Now, perception must surely be an act of consciousness. But according to Samkhya, the buddhi is an inanimate substance. How is it then that buddhi can be both sentient and sapient? This question does not arise in Western philosophy because it holds that both sensation and perception constitute but one single process of activity of the same consciousness. In other words, it holds that thoughts are also conscious, and so is the mind. Samkhya cannot accept this view for obvious reasons. According to it, thoughts also are inanimate objects, as I have said before. According to Samkhya, the buddhi is like a slate on which thoughts are being written from the time of the creation up till now. The writing on the slate is changing every moment due to new thoughts coming in and destroying or reinforcing the old ones. The final writing, or the shape of the buddhi at any given moment, is what we are concerned with at that moment. The final shape is called the ajya vasaya of the buddhi at that moment. The Purusa sees this final shape of the buddhi like a man seeing a photograph. It is actually a mental photograph of all the thoughts in the buddhi for the time being. A photograph has no meaning until a man looks at it and assigns a meaning, and then only it becomes a living picture. In the same way, when Purusa looks at the buddhi's shape, he understands it, and the latter also receives an induced consciousness, as it were, and appears to behave like a conscious being. See Karika 20. It is this adhyavasaya of the buddhi from which autosuggestion for all actions is derived. The organs of action automatically act according to this autosuggestion, as will be explained in Karikas 30 and 31. To make the point clearer, it has been distinctly said in Karika 31 that the organs discharge their respective functions automatically, and neither God nor the Purusa works them. They are so organized, and they act automatically. Alright, so since this isn't read in English anywhere I can find that I can just listen to it in full, I'm going to just read it without the notes, unless I really have to. I might read some of the notes, but I really just want to have a full reading of the Samkhya-Karika. So, 1. Being afflicted by threefold affliction, man desires to inquire about a means to end it. If you say that there are well-known ways to end affliction, and so further inquiry is unnecessary, my reply is, no, these ways are not certain, and they cannot remove affliction finally and once and for all. 2. The scriptural means to end misery is equally ineffective, because it is linked with impurity. Its effect is neither lasting nor always the same for all. Different therefrom, and superior thereto, is the means to be obtained by an intimate knowledge of the vyakta, the avyakta, and the jna, or jna. 3. The prakriti in her original state, as opposed to the pradhana of Karika 11, which is her subsequent state when her gunas come into action, is not a product of any change. The 7 tattvas, Mahatattva, Ahamkara, and the 5 tanmatras, are products of changes from one state to another, each tattva being related to the other immediately coming after it, in the relation of producer and product, or cause and effect. The 16 tattvas, viz. The 5 mahabhutas, which are the products of the tanmatras, the 10 sense organs, together with the mind, which form the 11 products of the Ahamkara tattva, are final products which suffer no further change of state, and, for the reason of that, are not the producers of anything else. The Purusa is neither the cause nor the result of any change. 4. There are only 3 recognized modes of proof, which can lead us to an understanding that the knowledge we have arrived at about a thing is true. They are 1. Direct cognition by the sense organs, 2. Inference by logical reasoning, and 3. Valid testimony, or apta vacanam. Other modes of proof being included in these 3, the establishment of the truth to be known about anything depends on the correctness of the mode of proving it. 5. Direct cognition is the final ascertainment of objects by the buddhi, adhyavasaya. Inference, which is based on a prior knowledge of a symbol and its relation to another symbol, is of 3 kinds, but apta vacana is verbal testimony of a truthful and wise man. 6. Knowledge of objects beyond the power of the senses to take cognition of may be derived by inference, which is based on analogy, which is obscure and not attainable even by inference, but may be knowable from apta vacana. 7. Non-perception of a thing which really exists may arrive from the following causes. 1. Extreme distance. 2. Extreme proximity to the eye. 3. Injury to the sense organs. 4. Want of attention of the mind. 5. Extreme subtlety of the object, e.g. an atom. 6. The object to be observed being veiled or suppressed. 7. The object being mixed up with similar things. 8. Non-perception of the prakriti is due to its subtlety and not to non-existence, since its existence can be inferred as being a cause of Mahatattva and the others, some of which are like it and the others unlike. 9. The effect even prior to its manifestation always exists as a real entity in its cause, which also must always be a real entity, as the following considerations will show. 1. Asada karanat, nothing can be produced out of a thing which is as non-existent as the barren woman's son. 2. Upada nagrahanat. In producing anything, one has to have recourse to the proper materials out of which only that thing can be produced. We cannot produce curd from water. Only milk can produce it. This shows that the effect has a certain fixed relation to its cause. 3. Sarva sambhava bhavat. It is not possible to press out oil from sand. Oil can be obtained from mustard seed or such other seeds in which it exists. This shows that the effect always exists in latent form in its cause. Otherwise, it should be possible to produce all things from anything. 4. Saktasya sakya karanat. It is common knowledge that the effect must be such as is within the power of the cause to create. There must therefore be a relation between the cause and the effect as regards potency also. 5. Karana bhavat. The cause and its effect have inherent or intrinsic similarity, or they may be as non-different as the woven cloth from its cause, viz. The threads. According to Samkhya, everything has a cause. The cause and its effect always coexist before the latter becomes known or visible. Nothing happens by chance. Chance, according to Samkhya, is a meaningless word used by us to cover our own ignorance when we cannot ascertain the cause of a thing. As shown in Karika 3 above, the whole universe is a continuous process of change of causes into their effects. The root cause, which itself is causeless, is avyakta, of the next Karika. 10. The Vyakta is caused, perishable, not all-pervading, manifold, dependent, emergent, has a form or shape, and supported by others. The Avyakta is just the reverse of all these. 11. Notwithstanding what has been said above in Karika 3 as to Prakriti and Puman being the same Avyakta, Prakriti or Pradhana in the manifested state, like any other manifested object, Vyakta, is composed of the three gunas, inseparable from the said gunas, objects of the senses, common objects of cognition, for all observers alike, non-conscious and productive, but the Puman being the reverse of these remains Avyakta as before. 12. The gunas give rise to delight, sorrow, and indifference. They illumine, accelerate, and restrain. These, their functions, they discharge, acting together, suppressing or helping each other, one of them working at a time, with the cooperation of the other two. See illustration in the introduction, part 5. 13. Sattva guna is said to be light and illumining, rajas, stimulating and accelerating, tamas, heavy and restraining. These three gunas act in cooperation toward a goal just like a lamp. These three gunas act in cooperation towards a goal just like a lamp. 14. The attributes inseparableness, objectivity, non-consciousness, etc., mentioned in Karika 11 of the Vyakta follow from the very fact that the Vyakta is composed entirely of the three gunas, and that it could not exist if it were not so composed, the effect being of the same nature as its cause. The Avyakta is also known, i.e. we can know that the gunas must have existed in latent form in the Avyakta. 15. The clause Karanamasti Avyaktam in the first line of the next Karika is the concluding portion of this Karika and not a part of Karika 16. 15. That the Avyakta is the root cause of this creation can be inferred from the following 5 considerations. 1. Bedanam parimanat, the finitude of the diverse. All the various objects beginning from Mahatattva are finite and limited and must therefore be caused. That cause again must have its own cause, and again a third cause, and so on. Ultimately, we arrive at an uncaused cause, and that is the Avyakta of Karika 10, the root cause of the whole creation. 2. Saman Vayat, sameness in diversity. If we think of the various objects in the world, we find that they have a common characteristic, viz. That they are all made of the three gunas. Take away the gunas and you arrive at the Avyakta. It follows, therefore, that the Avyakta is the root cause of all. 3. Saktya pravrittesya, or pravritteska, the effect depending on the potentiality of the cause, as explained above in Karika 9. When we consider about the magnitude of the activity of the universe, we cannot but be convinced that there must be an immense immeasurable force at work. This force being observable, and for the reason of that Avyakta element, it cannot exist without depending on a support, asrita of Karika 10. This force being observable, and for the reason of that Avyakta element, it cannot exist without depending on a support, asrita of Karika 10. If we go on thinking, we find that the last support must be itself supportless, anasrita, i.e. the Avyakta of Karika 10. 4. Karanakariya vibhagat, the distinction made between the cause and its effects. The Vyaktas, including the Pradhana, are caused, but they cannot be exactly of the same description as their causes, for that would mean a complete merger of effects into their causes. What distinguish the Vyaktas from their cause are the 5 attributes mentioned in Karika 11. Take them away and you arrive at the cause, which obviously is the Avyakta of Karika 10. Vaishva Rupyasaya Avibhagat. 5. Continuity of the diversity of the universe. The diverse objects in this universe, beginning from Mahatattva downwards, are the result of the continuous change of causes into effects as explained above. Now, at dissolution, the reverse processes, i.e. merger of effects into their causes, must happen. Thus, the Mahabhutas will emerge into their cause, i.e. the Tanmatras into the Ahamkara Tattva, and the latter into Pradhana, and Pradhana into the Avyakta. In the same way, the entire sense world will merge into the same Ahamkara Tattva, and finally into the Avyakta, which is the root cause of the whole creation. 16. Diversity of color, taste, smell, etc. arises from the three gunas acting in cooperation in various ways on various objects with which they come into contact, just as water gives rise to various tastes in various plants that absorb it. 17. The Purusha must exist because 1. Samgata Parathattvat. We have nothing to worry about when inanimate things lie scattered about here and there without any symmetry or arrangement. But when we find that they are so arranged that they can serve a useful purpose, we know that an intelligent person must have arranged them for himself or for another. The very symmetry, order, and law of the universe afford a proof, therefore, that the Purusha exists. 2. Triguna Divi Pariyayad. The person referred to above is surely unlike, or the reverse of, the things arranged by him. The things are non-conscious and mere objects of the senses, as per Karika 11. He must therefore be conscious, not an object of the senses, or in other words, he must be the seer. 3. Adhisthanat. Inanimate things cannot work or serve a useful purpose unless they are directed into a proper channel by an intelligent being, just as a motor car cannot run without a driver. 4. Bhoktar Bhavat. There is surely someone to enjoy, otherwise the whole creation will be meaningless. 5. Kaivalyartham Pravriteska. There is a desire, as said in Karika 1, for absolute release from misery. This desire cannot be of the buddhi or of any inanimate substance like prakriti, because, as will be shown hereafter, absolute release cannot be had without parting from the buddhi or destroying it altogether. Buddhi cannot be said to desire its own destruction. This desire must belong to one who is not the buddhi. 18. The incidences of birth and death and the action of the indriyas being different for different individuals, all men not having the same inclinations at the same time, the thoughts arising out of the actions of the three gunas being different for different men, it follows that souls, Purushas, are many, each man having a separate soul. See Introduction. 19. And from the contrast with the three gunas follow the characteristics of the Purusha being merely a witness, arbitrator, or seer, with no activity of its own, free of all connections with anything, and thus standing alone by itself. 20. Hence, i.e. from the fact that the Purusha contemplates upon the buddhi, the linga, i.e. the non-conscious buddhi, by virtue of its connection, samyoga, with the Purusha, behaves like a conscious being, or appears to be conscious. Thus, though activity is a function of the gunas only, the disinterested non-doer, i.e. the Purusha, thinks himself to be the doer. 21. This connection, samyoga, of the pradhana, buddhi, with the Purusha, is like the association of a blind man with a lame one, and it serves a dual purpose of the pradhana, being contemplated upon by the Purusha, and the consequent attainment of kaivalya, the state of loneliness or release, by the latter. Thus, they too have made the creation what it is. 22. From Prakriti proceeds the Mahatattva, equivalent to buddhi, thence the Ahamkara Tattva, the ego sense, thence the aggregate of the 16 or 11 sense organs, including the mind and the 5 tanmatras, and from the latter 5 the 5 mahabhutas come out. 23. Determination, adhyavasaya, is the buddhi, virtue, wisdom, non-attachment, and superhuman power constitute its sattvika form. The reverse of these constitute its tamasa form. 24. Ahamkara, i.e. the ego sense, is individuation or the conceit of one being a separate entity, therefrom arising the two kinds of creation, the 11 aggregates, sense organs of the mind, and the 5 tanmatras. 25. The sattvika 11, mind and the sense organs, proceed from the Vaikirta, Ahamkara. The 5 tanmatras, which are the original states of the 5 bhutas, proceed from that form of Ahamkara which is known as bhutadi, the origin of bhuta or matter. It is of the nature of tamas, dark or heavy. Both these changes are by the action of the taijasa Ahamkara. 26. The organs of consciousness, buddhin, driyani, are eye, ear, nose, tongue, and skin. Voice, hands, feet, and the organs of excretion and generation are called organs of action, karmen driyani. 27. Here, among the indriyas, both of cognition and of action, the mind partakes the nature of both sets. It intends the functioning of both the sets and is therefore an indriya like both. The varieties noticed in the construction and the working of the indriyas are the result of the activity of the gunas. So are the varieties in the external world. 28. In respect of sound, etc., i.e. sound, touch, color, smell, and taste, the function of the 5 organs of cognition is a mere indeterminate awareness called alokana. The functions of the 5 organs of action are speech, grasping, motion, excretion, and sexual enjoyment. 29. The function of buddhi is determination. That of ahamkara is self-consciousness. That of the mind is explication. But they cannot discharge their respective functions unless the prana is functioning at the same time. 30. In the case of what is present to perception, the functioning of the 4, viz. The internal organs and the 1 external organ, may be simultaneous or successive. Similarly, in case of what is not present to perception, and therefore when none of the external organs have been functioning, the functioning of the 3 internal organs based on previous perceptions may be either simultaneous or successive. 31. The organs, both internal and external, discharge their respective functions prompted by a mutual common impulse. That common impulse is the enjoyment, and final release thereby, of the Purusa. The organs are not made to work by any one. 32. The organs are of 13 varieties. Their functions are 3, viz. Carrying, holding, and illumining. Their actions are also of 10 varieties of the nature of carrying, holding, and illumining. 33. The internal organs are of 3 kinds. The external organs, which alone make objects known to the 3 internal organs, are 10-fold. The external organs can function only in the present. The internal organs can function, i.e. think, in the past, the present, and the future alike, without any distinction. So that's interesting. I kind of want to read the notes on that. In his comments on this Karika, Vachaspati has explained why Samkhya does not recognize time as an independent or objective category. When we think of a series of past events already known to us, and also of some future events which are likely to follow, the idea of time interval does not occur to us. If time were an objective something, the idea of time interval between 2 events would have been always there inseparably linked with the events themselves. Samkhya, therefore, begins by saying that the idea of time, i.e. astronomical time, is something which has no objectivity. It is a creation of the mind, but the ignorant man thinks it to be a substance. See Yoga Sutra, Vyasa Bhasya, Chapter 3, Part 5, verse 27. This is what he says about the astronomical time of the modern scientists. The relative and the only real time which the scientist speaks of is not called time at all in the Samkhya philosophy, for, as I said above, it is only the idea of our own existence, ego sense, in an endless time. I have stated in the introduction, part 2, how this eternal time, together with the idea of an infinite space, is a result of individuation of the soul in ahamkara tattva. This endless time is flowing from past to future in a ceaseless current like a river. Just as the terms up and down, in case of the river, will be meaningless without reference to the position of an object on its bank, so will the terms past, present, and future be quite meaningless unless they relate to a certain change in the physical world, or a certain action which we do. The false idea of an astronomical time arises out of and ultimately vanishes into the aforesaid eternal time, i.e. the ego sense, as the following illustration will show. Suppose I have to acquire a full knowledge of a particular object, say an orange. I first see it and know its color, shape, and size. Next I smell it and know how it smells. Next I break it open or peel it and taste it. I know how it tastes. I do various acts one after another. I'm smelling it now. This is my present. Seeing was my past, and tasting will be my future. But all this time my ego sense was with me. If one man smells and another tastes, neither of them will have a complete knowledge of the orange. The same eye that did the smelling must also do the tasting. This is how knowledge is acquired and how the idea of past, present, and future comes in. This is a result of our not being able to think of more than one thing at a time, or doing more than one work at a time. If all knowledge were always present in our mind, the above successiveness of events would vanish at once, just as the idea of time interval vanishes when we think of a series of known past events extending over a long period of time. Samkhya further says that the idea of both space and time, because they are linked together as stated above, occurs to us on account of the actions of the 5 Mahabhutas. See Samkhya Sutra 2.12. If there were no objects or changes in the physical universe and consequently nothing to see or think about, the idea of time and space disappears. What will then remain will be the bare idea of self-existence. The two ideas, space and time, are inseparable according to modern science also. 1. Henceforward, space in itself and time in itself as independent things must sink into mere shadows. Minkowski. 2. Thus, nature knows nothing of space and time separately, being concerned only with the four-dimensional continuum in which space and time are welded inseparably together, into the product we may designate as space-time. Sir James Jeans. In classical physics, they, time and space, were considered to be different objects, and were measured with different units, viz. A clock and a scale. This is why the Fitzgerald contraction referred to in Part 1 of the introduction arose in all of their calculations. 34. Of these, the 5 organs of cognition have as their objects of cognition both the 5 avisheshas, undivided into their components, and their components, vishesas. Speech has only sound for its object as regards the rest, i.e. the organs of action. They have only the 5 Mahabhutas as their objects. 35. Since the buddhi with the other 2 internal organs determines finally all truths and knowledge about the objects of the sense organs, the 3 internal organs stand to the sense organs in relation to the doorkeeper and the door. 36. These, i.e. external organs, the mind and the ahamkara, are derived from the gunas and are component parts of the gunas. They are unlike each other. They are, in this respect, comparable to a lamp. They illumine all objects of enjoyment of the Purusa and present them to the buddhi. 37. The materials worked upon by all the organs being presented to buddhi, it is the buddhi which brings about the enjoyment of the Purusa in all matters. And it is that buddhi again which reveals to the Purusa the incomprehensible difference between the Prakriti and the Purusa. See Karika 64. 38. The tanmatras are avishesha. From these 5 tanmatras proceed 5 mahabhutas. These later are said to be viseshas. They are objects of our enjoyment, and they produce in our mind the feelings of tranquility, horror, or delusion, as the case may be under different circumstances. What is this? 38, 39. The visesha bodies, mark the word visesha, are threefold. Vis, the sukshma, subtle body, the gross bodies born of parents, and with the great elements, mahabhutas. Of these, the sukshma body is lasting, while the two bodies born of parents perish. 40. The linga, which is a mere collection of thoughts, which is the first thing or which was formed prior to all the other things, which is not attached to any particular body, i.e. which can assume all the 14 kinds of subtle bodies, which is eternal, which can penetrate into all subtleties from Mahatattva downwards, which cannot enjoy, this linga migrates. 41. Just as a picture cannot exist without a base, or canvas, or a shadow without a substance on which to fall, so too, linga, being mere subtle energy in the form of thought, cannot manifest itself without a visesha, a sukshma body, which it itself creates. 42. This linga, by virtue of its connection with what may be called causes and their effects, behaves, i.e. migrates, like an actor in a play playing different parts. It does so for the enjoyment and ultimate good of the Purusa. All this is possible on account of Prakriti's all-powerful nature. 43. Each of the 8 kinds of thoughts, beginning with dharma, is particularly innate and partly acquired, i.e. acquired in previous lives and in this life. They are dependent for their nourishment upon the buddhi, but the embryo, with all its subsequent development, is dependent for its nourishment upon the affected, viz. The finished products, or food, i.e. the body. 44 and 45. Dharma enables a man to go up, i.e. to go to a better world. A dharma, to go downwards. Jnana, wisdom, leads him to release. Ajnana, ignorance, to bondage. Vairagya, non-attachment, results in merger in Prakriti. Aivaragya, which is a result of rajasika thoughts, makes a man passionately attached to the world. Aishvarya leads to non-obstruction of desire, i.e. it enables one to get whatever he wishes for. The opposite, i.e. anaishvara, gives the contrary result. 46. This is the sense world created by the buddhi, its distinguishing. Characteristics are false knowledge, viparyaya, infirmities, asakti, complacency, tusti, and true knowledge, siddhi. From these arise 50 different impediments to true knowledge, and all of these differences are due to the modes of working of the 3 gunas. 47. 5 are the varieties of false knowledge. Infirmities due to organic defects are 28 in number. Complacency of the mind is of 9 kinds. True knowledge has 8 divisions. 48. Tamas, avidya, is of 8 kinds. Moha, asmita, also 8 kinds. Mahamoha, raga, 10 kinds. Tamisra, devesha, 18. So also 18 of anda tamisra, or abhinivesa. 49. The infirmities of the 11 organs, together with the infirmities of the buddhi alone, are said to be the 28 infirmities, referred to in Karika 47. Buddhi's own infirmities can be divided into 17 subdivisions according to the impediments to true knowledge in the 9 varieties of tushti, complacency, and the 8 kinds of true knowledge, siddhi, described below. 50. Tushti, complacency, is of 8 kinds. 4 arising in one's own mind, i.e. prakriti, nature. 2, upadana, means. 3, time. 4, luck. And 5 arising out of turning away from the 5 objects of enjoyment. 51. The 8 ways to attain true knowledge are 1. Independent thinking and reasoning by a man of genius. 2. Oral instructions. 3. Study. 4, 5, and 6. Instructions as to how to suppress the 3 kinds of misery. 7. Friendly discussion. And 8. Gifts which serve the purpose of acquiring true knowledge. Those 3 mentioned before, i.e. Viparyaya, Asakti, and Tushti, are hindrances to attainment of true knowledge. 1. The word uha means genius. Some men of genius may merely, by independent thinking, realize the difference between the Purusha and Prakriti, and thereby attain self-realization. Kapila is said to have been born with such knowledge. 2. Other men referred to in 4 and 5 and 6 above, being afflicted by the 3 kinds of miseries, go to a preceptor for means to end them. They also can attain self-knowledge. 52. Without a sense world, there could not be a physical world, and without a physical world, there could not be enjoyment of the sense world. Therefore, there are 2 different creations, viz. The sense world, Bhavyakaya Sarga, and the physical world, Lingakaya Sarga. 53. The superhuman creation, Daiva Sarga, is of 8 different kinds. The subhuman creation is of 5 kinds. The human creation is of 1 variety. Such, in brief, is the physical creation of the Buddhas, i.e. Tanmatras. 54. High up, i.e. in the superhuman creation, Sattva predominates. At the bottom, Tamas. In the middle, Rajas. This is so from Brahma down to a blade of grass. 55. Here, i.e. these 14 different orders of the creation, the conscious Purusha has to undergo the misery consequent on decay by old age and death, until the linga ceases to function. Hence, misery is naturally inevitable. 56. This is the creation brought about by Prakriti and consisting of Mahatattva down to the gross elements and their components. The objects of this creation is the release of every soul. This creation is for the benefit, i.e. the enjoyment and final release therefrom, of another, i.e. Purusha, although it seems as if Prakriti is doing all these for her own benefit. 57. As milk is secreted in the cow's udder for the nourishment of the calf, and as the said secretion automatically ceases when the calf is grown up, so does nature act spontaneously for the release of the Purusha, and ceases to act when the object is attained. 58. Just as a man, in order to satisfy a curiosity, engages himself in play, so does the Avyakta for enjoyment and final release of the Purusha. 59. As a dancing girl desists from dancing, having exhibited herself to the audience, so does Prakriti desist after having exhibited herself to the Purusha. 60. Without any benefit to herself, Prakriti, who is endowed with the Gunas, serves in manifold ways and therefore does good to the Purusha, who is the eternal reality, but who, being devoid of the Gunas, i.e. being inactive, does not requite her in any way. 61. The Purusha thinks, I have now come to know that there is no other easily comprehensible phenomenal cause of the creation than Prakriti. Prakriti, who knowing that she has been seen by a Purusha, will never again come to the view of the said Purusha. 62. For this reason, the Purusha now understands. It is only the Prakriti, in her manifold forms, that suffers bondage, migrates, and is finally liberated. The Purusha is never under bondage, nor is he liberated, nor does he migrate. 63. Prakriti binds herself by the 7 forms of thoughts, and she herself releases herself through the remaining 1 form, for the benefit of the Purusha. And so I'm wondering why they said there was no commentary, I guess, for this verse for a while. But he says, the reference here is to Karika number 23. where it is said that the buddhi is a mere collection of thoughts which are divisible into 8 categories. All these thoughts except one, viz. Jnana, are creations of Prakriti, and she alone can terminate them by natural means, such as are prescribed, say, in the Patanjala philosophy, or in Karika 69 below. It is therefore said in this Karika that Prakriti binds herself by 7 kinds of thoughts, viz. Virtue, vice, ignorance, attachment, non-attachment, power, and want of power. When a man gets rid of all these kinds of thoughts, he parts with Prakriti forever. These 7 kinds of thoughts are like a screen over his head, and as soon as they are removed, he sees the reality which is he himself. He cannot remove the screen himself, being entirely inactive. This will be made clearer in the next Karika, when it will be also explained why Purusa cannot part with Prakriti, unless Prakriti herself parts from him first. 64. In this way, practicing the 24 tattvas, there results that jnana, consciousness, I do not exist, nothing is mine, I am not, which jnana is all-comprehensible, without impurity and absolute. 65. By that intimate knowledge, referred to in the preceding Karika, in being restored to himself, the Purusa sees, like a spectator from a distance, the Prakriti, who has now become unproductive and devoid of her 7 forms. 66. 1. The witness says, I have seen her, I understand what she is, and so understanding becomes indifferent. The other saying, I have been seen, desists from further prompting. Thus, although there is still conjunction between the two, there is no need for further creation, i.e. rebirth. 67. Even after attainment of perfect wisdom as a result of the 7 kinds of thoughts, beginning with virtue, having become inoperative, the Purusa remains attached to the body, continues to live for a while, because of his samskara which continues to function, just as a potter's wheel continues to move for a while by its own inertia, even after the motive power has been withdrawn. 68. On being disassociated from the body, and Prakriti having retired after doing all that was necessary, the Purusa attains that release which is both certain and final, because he will not be born again. 69. This abstruse philosophy, accessory to the attainment of the final objects of the Purusa, in which it deals again with the origin, existence, and dissolution of all beings, was fully expounded by the great sage Kevala. 70. This pure supreme knowledge was first imparted by the sage to Asuri, out of kindness to him, and by Asuri also to Pankasika. And he, Pankasika, elaborated it in various ways, or spread it in various ways. 71. The learned Ishvara Krishna, realizing the whole truth, briefly set down in these Arya meters the conclusion of this philosophy which had been handed down through a succession of pupils. 72. The subjects of these 70 Karikas are verily those of the entire Shashti Tantra. These Karikas do not contain any illustrative tales, nor do they criticize rival views. 73. Hence, this briefly expounded Sastra is not defective and is, as it were, an image in a small mirror of a huge object, the Shashti Tantra.